The very second that you look at another human being and you see yourself as elevated above them or them as a pawn in any way, a means to an end for you, I promise you, you're playing in the same frequency energy that is driving child trafficking and all the other challenges we have in this world.
Paul Hutchinson,
co-founder of Bridge Investment Group, one of the largest real estate investment firms in the United States. Paul helped build a real estate investment powerhouse managing billions of dollars in assets before dedicating his life to philanthropy, humanitarian work, and the fight against child trafficking.
You guys, this is an incredibly important podcast. This is an interview with a gentleman named Paul Hutchinson. And if you've ever seen the movie The Sound of Freedom, which is a movie about child sex trafficking that was incredibly popular, released just a few years ago. He is the executive producer of that movie, and also a character played a role of him in that movie that actually went in as a wealthy millionaire to go, quote unquote, undercover to pretend that he was buying children to actually get these kids out of trafficking. And the reason why we're featuring him is because Paul spent the early years of his life, I guess you can say his 20s and 30s, building a company called Bridge Loan Capital, which turned into a company that manages over $49 billion in assets. He became incredibly wealthy, but also incredibly unfulfilled. And he made a shift in his life where he decided he wanted to do something important for humanity, dove into the world of trafficking and getting kids out of trafficking, spent years, saved somewhere around 7,000 kids on 70 different missions, and then had another life transformation where he got into more spiritual work, where he's helping people heal actually before they get to a point where they might do something like harm children or do bad or evil in the world. The podcast is very powerful, you guys. This is one you want to check out for sure. What Paul is saying, how people can help, how entrepreneurs can find fulfillment in their lives, because we all start businesses to make money, let's just say, but then a lot of people lose fulfillment at a certain part of their lives and their entrepreneurial journey. And he talks about how people can find that in different ways. That business and entrepreneurship is not just about making money, but it's about adding value to the world in different ways for different people at different times and chapters in our life. So guys, please turn this up, listen to this podcast. It's an important one. Paul has helped a lot of people, a lot of children. They're currently helping an estimated 10,000 kids per month or so with the programs that they have set up. Check it out, you guys. Enjoy the podcast. I hope it hits home for you. I know it did for me. Brought up tears, brought up emotions, brought up fears, brought up some deep contemplation, and I think it'll do the same for you. So enjoy the podcast, and we'll hop into it now. Listeners, welcome today. We have a guest that I'm very excited to chat with for a few reasons. First off, he is one of the founders of Bridge Investment Group. His name's Paul Hutchinson, and started this company back in 2006 after a scuba diving trip to Ecuador, and built it up into a company, an asset company that manages over $49 billion in annual assets under management, He retired in 2017 and then dove into the world of nonprofit to help children that are involved in sex trafficking, and spent a good amount of years doing undercover operations, over 70 operations in nearly 10 years, and then made a transformation when he had probably, well, we'll talk to him and see if this is accurate, probably had enough of being undercover for a long time and had a spiritual transformation and started to help children in sex trafficking in a different way, which we'll get to talk about here on the show. Paul, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing so good. So good, Chris. Thank you.
This is really exciting because I love founders and entrepreneurs that get to a point in their life where they really truly feel they need to give back. And your story is quite phenomenal because it's I don't want to say typical, but it is it kind of a typical capitalist story. You know, you went out there, you guys started a business from scratch, from nothing, and you built it up to $1 billion company, multi-billion dollar company, and then had a shift in your life where you wanted to do something bigger. So we're going to start off here talking about business stuff because, as you know, we're interviewing $100 billion founders. And then we're going to dive into what life was like after you had, quote unquote, conquered the world or the business world and what happens after that. So Bridge Investment Group, you and John Pennington started it. Literally, the idea came from a scuba diving trip in Ecuador. Is that right?
Oh, kind of. We were playing around with our own money doing bridge loans, and it was crazy. This guy, we were managing some other people's, but we didn't really have a fund. And we got a call from a guy who needed needed $250,000 to buy a boat. And we're like, what a boat for? He goes, well, I have some Navy SEALs that literally found some buried treasure off the coast of some different countries. And we're like, okay, this sounds kind of crazy. We're not gonna, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors. We can't be, throwing money at stuff like that. But then I had one of my investors who, he had so much money, he could lose $250,000 in his couch cushion and not miss it. So he goes, Paul, he says, look, I don't trust anybody, but I trust you. He said, why don't you and John just go down and check it out? And if it's legit, I'll fly down. I'll fund it. I'll just make this happen. And we're like, okay. So, we flew down, and that's a whole other deep story, but it could take half an hour just to tell the story of the drug lords down there and all of the blood diamond type guys. It was sketch. But on the way back, we had a long layover, and John and I are sitting in a hot tub in Miami because it was a 24-hour layover. We were hanging out there, and he said, Paul, he said, we could like really build this, not just our own money. And I had a successful exit in my late 20s, and so I had some of my own money at the time. He says, we could go big. And at the time, my wife at the time, she was kind of sick of me telling her how to micromanage the home better. She kind of needed me to go get another real focused occupation because, so I said, yeah, maybe we should just build this. So that was our beginning. We sat there for 6 hours just planning it all out. And I said, yeah, well, let's do it. And I'm in charge of making it rain, and he's in charge of making sure that the water doesn't turn everything to mud. That's what we decided.
Did you guys find a buried treasure? We got to figure that out.
Dude, this is a cool story.
Okay,
so
totally.
we will go back to where it was and pull up. The problem is the government. In fact, I've got some close friends in the government now because of the undercover work that I've done now that are paying close attention to who's in and who's not. Because as soon as the right people are in, we're going back. We had some metal detectors that identified this massive area that was about 20 feet under the water that Sir Francis Drake had reportedly dumped over 50 tons of gold and silver overboard. This is in the 1500s when he was pillaging everything in Latin America, and evidently the Spaniards were after him, and he was trying to figure out how to outrun them. And so he dumped a whole bunch overboard in a place that he could come back, and nobody ever found it. Well, this treasure hunter guy believes that he found it. He found a brick that was stamped Sir Francis Drake on it, and so that's what we were going in to pull up. But the political situation hasn't been such where we could feel comfortable that if we invested the money that we would get any of it. So.
Understood.
But what's interesting, and I talk about this in my Infinite Wealth book, how sometimes all you have to do is just throw out there what it is you want. We were looking for multi-billion-dollar treasure at a time where it was that very trip that we sat down and in the hot tub figured out, okay, well, maybe we can't find it in a safe way buried under the ocean, but what if we just built something that created the same kind of income that we would get from pulling it off the floor? A lot safer, a lot funner. Maybe not funner, but
but a lot safer for sure. Some of those treasure hunts, the old stories, people don't come back alive, or pirates catch them. And
we almost didn't. I'm telling you, there was a drug lord down there that caught whiff of what we were doing, and that he was trying to hold us captive in his big mansion house. And we realized that the only reason why he was so connected with the government is everybody was dirty down there. He was doing drug deals with government leaders, and so we're like, okay, yeah, we're gonna get out of Dodge for a minute.
Yeah, smart. What was the first company you built?
The first one was one that helped people overcome anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma. I sold it for $20 million at 29 years old. It was, now most of that was restricted stock in a pink sheet company, but I was rich on paper, and that made me feel good about myself. I had 50,000 people a month calling in off of an infomercial to get an audio program and a workbook and tools to help them overcome the things that so many Americans deal with. Literally we'll talk about this at the end of the show, but one of the reasons why Joe Rogan reached out to Trump recently, and they signed this executive order literally last Saturday to fast track the research on the use of psychedelics to help people with anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, childhood traumas, because 1 in every 4 of us in any given year are dealing with one of those things to the point where it's debilitating. Yeah. And so we had a cognitive restructuring program with the workbooks and audio programs that help people. So that was my first big exit at 29 years old. And then a few years later is when John and I started Bridge Investment Group and built it to billion.
Did you have a business background growing up? Did you have were you in a family of entrepreneurs, or was this
My dad kind of climbed the corporate ladder at a construction company, and he did pretty well. It was a concrete company that did things for airports and whatever, but not really well. We didn't even have furniture in my living room when I moved out of the house, So, but I always wanted to go into business. He told me, he said, Paul, he said, you're never going to be good in business. And I'm like, well, why not? He said, well, because you're not very good with authority. And I'm like, well, he was thinking corporate ladder climbing, yes, kissing butt type of a thing, and he had never gone down the entrepreneurial route. Yeah. And so I was encouraged to be a doctor, and I was studying. I was 2 months away from taking the MCAT on my road to becoming a surgeon. I wanted to be a pediatric cardiologist, and I 2 months away from taking that test, and I got in a major car accident, and I severed the tendons in my hand. And I still have I-80 in the palm of my hand, and they told me, oh, you can be I don't know if you'll have the dexterity to be a surgeon, but you can be a regular doctor. And my exact answer was, I don't want to be a regular anything. I don't want, if I'm going to be a garbage man, I'm going to own the dump. If I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a pediatric cardiologist. That's just how I think. And so I changed my major to business and finance, and with a goal of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I mean, not respecting authority, or not, I don't want to say not listening to authority is a great trait as a founder, but not an employee, right?
Especially. Well, and it was what drove me. I realized, you know what, I would rather own my own hot dog stand than ask somebody when I can go to the bathroom. That's just, I'm not going to kowtow to some dude who says, oh, you're 5 minutes late. You know what? I'm 5 minutes late because I was working till 10 last night. So screw you. This is, I tell young entrepreneurs, I say, guys, I said, here's the thing. If you're not the hardest boss you've ever had on yourself, then you need to go get a job. If you need an alarm clock to wake up in the morning, then you don't have a big enough dream. If you have a hard time working 60 to 70 hours a week on your own, then you need a boss to tell you that you need to get your ass into work. So, I mean, it's a mindset, but you've got to figure out how to overcome your own laziness in every way.
Yeah, it's a discipline thing. I remember I started as an entrepreneur around 2006, 2007 or so. And at first I was like being lazy, sleeping in, and I just wasn't making any money. Like my business was like, nothing was coming. I'm like, well, this isn't working. Like maybe I should not work more than 4 hours a day.
Exactly.
Even though I had made it as an entrepreneur, I hadn't really made it. I just quit my job and started selling things online.
Exactly.
I like to kind of start off on this to get a grasp of your business with Bridge Capital. I always ask the guest if you could break the growth of that company, Bridge Capital, into chapters. What would you call each chapter?
Chapter 1 was, I even call it in my Infinite Wealth book coming out, it's a shift in consciousness. You have to start with believing where you're going. And John tells a story a lot about how we were in this little teeny office, and they say, oh, did you see it? Did you see how big you guys would end up? He goes, no, but somehow Paul did. He said, we were in this little office so small that we would bump elbows, and, we had a deal where we needed $25,000 by Friday, and I'm making calls, trying to get somebody to invest in this project that we had to fund by Friday. And I remember hanging up the phone. I turned around, I did the Austin Powers thing, you put your little pinky by your mouth, and I said, John, we're going to be $1 billion fund someday. And he's like, Paul, he said, we need $25,000 by Friday. But it was that you have to have that vision. You have to overcome the fear. I actually had on my first luxury car, I had on my license plate, it said no excuses, NOXQSES. And on the license plate cover, it said, feel the fear and do it anyway. So the beginning was all about a mindset change, a shift in consciousness, an understanding of abundance versus scarcity, an understanding of overcoming the fear, of visualizing where you wanted to go, and getting into a place where you could tune in to that direction of, we can talk about that later, but I talk about meditation a lot and really tuning into that still small, that space of silence, of guidance. And, you can call it God, you can call it the universe, call it whatever you want to. There's powers out there that will catapult you into the direction that you want to go, but you have to decide where you want to go first. If you don't decide, then you'll get nowhere with amazing accuracy. Yeah. And then from there, the next chapter is in creating a true win-win-win, a value for value. And, I talk a lot about that in the part 2 of this, of serving real needs of what people can really use. Not saying, oh, I have this really cool thing that I want. No, putting yourself in people's shoes and saying, how can I provide real, true value for them and create a win-win-win, not something that you ever have to lose. So many people have a mindset of business where they believe that the only way that they can get ahead is for somebody else to lose. And the problem is, if you're a decent human being, and if anything in your mindset believes in a zero-sum game, that in order for you to make $100 million, then $100 million has to come out of the pockets of other people. If you think that that's how the world works, subconsciously you will sabotage your own success. You need to understand that there are ways for you to create a true win-win-win where you can have $10 million a year, $100 million a year coming into you and your family while you're creating $200 or $300 million a year worth of value for the world. And in that mindset change, then you can create systems and companies and products that create real value in the lives of others. And so, in fact, I'm going to take a little two-minute side thing and tell a story on this that I teach in the book of 10 men on an island, where every day there's 10 families and 10 men go out and they go fishing every day. And life is good. They catch just enough fish to feed their families. Years go on. Then one day, two women, because usually the women are a little bit more creative and they're thinking, our boys are out fishing all day doing nothing. We're here. Let's figure out a better way to do this. So two women come up with this idea of a net. They sew this net and they show it to their husbands and they go out and try it. And wow, the two guys can now catch enough fish to feed the entire island in a couple hours. Now, the problem we have is 80% unemployment, right? You've got 8 guys that now don't have anything to do. So a dysfunctional system would tax those two men 80% of their fish while everybody else is sitting around. A well-functioning economy, now you've created wealth out of thin air through creativity. So now you've got 8 men where one of them can learn how to build boats, one can get better at building huts, one can get better at educating the children, whatever it is. Lifestyle as a whole literally increases because money was created out of thin air by the creativity of those two women. And that's what happens. This is why most of us live as kings today. If you've got a refrigerator and indoor plumbing, you live better than kings did 1,000 years ago because of the creativity of the human mind. You tap into that, you can create infinite wealth for yourself and for all of humanity.
Well said. How about chapter 3?
I would say that chapter 3 was really identifying the right team. Once you've created the structure, and the team is the hardest part. I look back in the years of my businesses, the times where it's hurt the most is where I had a partner that was not in integrity. You can teach skills, you can figure out how to put the right people in the right seats on the bus, but if you don't have somebody with true integrity who knows how to lead from the heart that you can trust, and that's the thing about John Pennington, I could trust him implicitly. I knew that if I put my grandma's money in and it was her last penny, I knew that he would do everything possible to make sure that it was handled with integrity. And so once we created the framework, then, and I'm gonna tout this, one of my favorite partners was a guy by the name of Don Hartman. Don's resume was one of the most impressive pieces of paper I'd ever seen. He had raised $14 billion to bail out the Asian debt crisis in the late 90s. We were living in Utah at the time, and he jokes and says, yeah, Paul found me walking around Salt Lake with an unemployed sign. I'll work for equity. But the truth is, it was a 1 in a billion chance that guy ended up being in our camp at that time. Because what happened is in late 2006, as he comes in my office and he said, Paul, we're in trouble. I said, we the company? He goes, no, we the country, if not the whole world. He said, we're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar problem. And he was talking about the 2008 crisis a year and a half before it happened. Yeah. And his understanding of third-order polynomial equations that were way over my head was what allowed us to position ourselves right. And I believe that me doing the Austin Powers, we're going to be $1 billion fund, whatever it is, that vision of where we wanted to go energetically brought the right people in. And he was so impressed with our work ethic and what we had created that he came on as a partner. And with his help, we were able to foresee that crisis before it happened. And when the rest of the market was losing 30 and 50%, we didn't lose any principal. We paid out a positive return, and the next year paid out a 48% IRR to our investors. Over the next 15 years, a 23.2 net return per year for our investors. Why? Because we had the right people in the right seats on the team. And then beyond that, recognizing that me and John didn't have the pedigree, the background, the experience to run a company. Pretty soon, we built a company that was so successful that we weren't even qualified to be in some of the rooms negotiating with Morgan Stanley to put a $300 million check with us. And that's okay. It's okay to be humble enough to realize, okay, I'm going to maintain a degree of control here, but I need some guys who are smarter than me. And I'm not afraid to say that there's guys that can do this job better. So I'm going to replace myself with guys that can.
I specifically want to talk about that time you guys foresaw the '08 recession and then started pulling returns much above the average return that was coming. Because I assume as well that there's another recession, depression probably on the way pretty soon.
Very soon.
AI is transforming everything. Global politics is going crazy. And when COVID happened, I launched a business community and helped like 72 founders through that time because I had survived the '08 recession. Survive is a nice word. I existed through the '08 recession by donating plasma and eating Cheerios with water in it instead of milk.
Oh, wow.
And, but anyway, I made it through, but I knew that it was possible and I knew what founders were going to go through. And so in 2000, when COVID happened, we had 72 people come and we escorted them as best as possible through the mindset and the emotions of keeping your business afloat for the next 3, 6, 12 months or whatever. And it's probably going to happen again. It sounds like you did it really, really well. Obviously, no, you did do it really, really well. What can we do to prepare for what's next based on kind of how you guys prepared and what you foresaw back 06, 07?
So there's a saying that is attributed to Baron Rothschild years ago. He said that the best time to make money is when there's blood in the streets. Now, I'm not a fan of the Rothschilds at all, especially, and I'm not a fan of that quote. However, he's right. That's the best time to make money, but not making money off of the pain of people when they're going through the challenges. I like to say the best time to make money is when there's blood in the streets by providing first aid kits to the people who need them.
Yeah.
And so by foreseeing where things are going, you can position yourself to create a true win. For example, when Don saw this potential crisis happening, he said, Paul, you're really good at raising money. You're great at working with people. John is fantastic at dealing with FTC and dealing with all of the legal stuff. He says, but you guys need some real estate adults in the room. And so we teamed up with a group that had done multifamily for a long time and became one of the top purchasers with all of the GSEs. This is Freddie, Fannie, HUD, FDIC before it happened. So let me teach you about the true win-win of creating first aid kits. We got a call when a bank had 30 days to live because we were already pre-qualified. We had already put together the team that could handle the asset classes, et cetera. By then, the bank president's willing to negotiate. He realizes if the FTC if he gets shut down, he ends up losing a job. His shareholders have a zero. So we say, look, that $100 million portfolio, we're going to pay you cash for it on Friday of $30 million. You'll have enough liquidity to be able to stay in business, and you're going to have to write some things down, but it's a win for the bank. Now, the tenants in that property were in a bank-owned property. There was weeds, the pool drains weren't up to code. I mean, it was a crappy place to live. So we had a team that could go in and create a real win for the tenants. We're not putting gold towel rods in a B-class neighborhood, but we're going to bring in English as a second language and the bookmobile. And we took a lot of our tenants in some of these areas were primarily Hispanic. And so we brought in tools that helped them have a better life for their family. And we made sure that the pool was working and that we had soccer leagues and that the roofs weren't leaking and whatever. But it was a win for them. Now everybody else was laying off and we were hiring. So it was a win for our employees who were hardworking. And our investors were earning a heavy double-digit return. It was a win for our investors. So by taking a look at where your industry could go if things got bad and say, okay, where could the first aid kits be produced? How can I look ahead and create a win for everybody in my circle in a way that's going to create value for them and value for me? You do that and you can make millions of dollars at a time where everybody else is losing. Similar to what you did. You created a win with the entrepreneurs that were trying to figure out how to stay in business. That win is what catapulted you into where you are today.
Next thing I want to touch on is what makes you good at raising money. I know there's so many people out there now that struggle raising money. They have their pitch decks, they're trying to raise for this or that, whatever, startups are all over the place. 90% of them are crashing at the same time. 10% of them work. And I think this is you seem like a charming guy if you tell stories well. But what do you think it is about you that makes you really a pro at raising money?
When I was 14 years old and I asked my dad, hey, how do you become successful? I had just, gone through some rough stuff at school and I was feeling like a nerd and nobody liked me. And I said, Dad, how do you become successful in life? Teach me. And he gave me two gifts. He gave me an old tattered book that he had had for years, written by Dale Carnegie, called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And the other one was Brian Tracy's audio program, The Psychology of Achievement. And we already talked a little bit about the psychology of achievement and changing your mindset and seeing where you want to go and attracting those things in your life. Well, the book, though, helped me see the world in a totally different lens. That if I could simply figure out how to put myself in somebody else's shoes, then everything worked better in our negotiation. A drop of honey attracts more bees than a gallon of gall type thing is what he says in there. And so what I did is I'll tell an example. We had a very wealthy family, one that everybody would know if I said the names, but they owned some of the largest hotel chains in the world. And I was trying to get in the door with this guy. I'd met him at a charity event and, he wouldn't respond to my texts and whatever. And I'm thinking, how do I get in the door? And, he was a very conservative, family-oriented man. And I heard that there was a clean comedian named Brian Reagan who was coming to town. And I thought, maybe I'll just invite him to this. Instead of just trying to pitch him on my thing all the time, I'm going to build a relationship with him. And so I sent him a text and I said, hey, this is Paul, again from Bridge. I said, just wondering, I have some extra tickets to the Brian Reagan comedy show coming in town. And, super clean, family oriented, wondering if you want to go. And he texts me back and he says, how many tickets do you have? Now, at that point, when Mr. Marriott says, how many tickets do you have? You text back, you say, how many do you need? Right? So that's just how you do. Yes. So I text back, how many do you need? He goes, I got my family and my kids and whatever. And I said, fantastic, perfect. We'd love to have you, right? So it's those kind of things and putting yourself in the shoes of other people and say, how do I create a win for them and build that bridge, that relationship with them? So a lot of, in each presentation, you also have to ask yourself, what is this investor looking for? Is this a new entrepreneur who, he feels like he can make another $10 million tomorrow if he wanted to. He's not so worried about losing stuff, but he wants a really good return. A lot of our Asian investors, they were ROE guys, not return on equity. They were, and I love them. We had a lot of money from, but it was more of a return on ego. They would rather show a really nice apartment complex that they had invested in than a B-class thing that was run down that made a lot of money. So I had to present them with a different mindset of understanding what they were looking for rather than what I would say to somebody that was a third generation money that wanted to make sure he didn't lose it. So it's putting yourself in their shoes. And the other thing that is first of all, you have to get in the door with them. I remember in the beginning, John and I were like, okay, we're doing good with our own money. Now let's raise money. What do we do with raise money? And I had ideas like, well, let's do an advertising. Let's put a billboard up, and say the returns are, he goes like, no, we have to have a private offering. He said, you have to figure out how to get in the door and build relationships with ultra wealthy people and then show them what we're doing. So I had a piece of paper. I took it out and I wrote at the top, where do rich people hang out? And I'm writing down, I'm like, I don't know. They paid $200 for a month for a membership at this certain gym. They go to, I had a Humvee. I wrote on there, the Hummer Club in Moab, Utah, let's go to that. Or, the races out at the raceway on the Lambos and whatever. So I wrote all these things down. And then I wrote, I met a lot of guys at the charity events. Maybe that's what it is. And I realized that every single gala in your town, every single one in your city has the lead sponsors, the hosts, the $10,000 donors, the $25,000 donors. Yeah. Well, I just got myself invited to every one of them. And I bought a single seat for $200 sitting at the back. But before I went, I memorized every single face of every single major sponsor of everybody that was there. And I would go, and my goal would be to simply build relationships with those guys on their turf. And then from there, we could lead it into share with them what we were doing with the fund.
I've heard a lot of really fun stories. One is a guy that we've interviewed a couple times and did a collaboration with, Jeff Hoffman. one of the founders of Priceline, or
Yeah,
founding executive of Priceline.
I love Jeff.
He's fun. He was telling us one day he stalked a guy for 3 months that he wanted to get as an investor, and wouldn't return calls, wouldn't return calls. So he bought a ticket to a horse race that this guy was going to be at. But Jeff bought the cheap ticket, because he didn't have a lot of money, and then he realized this guy had a VIP tent, and he couldn't get to the VIP tent because he had on the wrong color bracelet. But Jeff could buy the buffet, and at the buffet was shared with the VIP tent. And so he went out and he got a buffet, but he sat at the buffet and waited for the guy to come out and get lunch. And he knew this guy had an interest in, what was it? Something like dogs or something like that. I forget exactly what it was. And he sat there and he just mentioned dogs as he was at the buffet, ironically getting food the same time this guy was. And this guy's ears perked up and he said, "Oh yeah, I love that." And Jeff's like, "I love this breed." I don't think it was dogs, but it was something along this lines. I forget the story exactly. And he just warmed up to Jeff a lot. And he's like, "Hey, I have a VIP tent. You want to come back to my tent? We'll talk more about our dogs." Jeff was like, "Yeah, of course." Didn't mention what he was doing at all. Didn't mention he was just building a relationship. And by the end of the day, he said, "Hey, I'd love to talk more about dogs and talk business." And the guy's like, "Yeah, let's do it. How about Monday you come to the office?" And he came to the office, and the secretary that had been blowing him off for the previous 3 months was like, what are you doing here? And he's like, "I have a meeting." And she's like, "You do?" And then she looked on. But these stories are really fun because it's adventurous, right? And it seems like you have similar tactics of whatever can work. But again, it's about finding a commonality, finding something that you could chat with that individual, warm up with them, and then seeing if they're, like you keep saying, win-win-win, seeing if there's a win-win-win-win-win situation that you all can work out.
Exactly. Yeah. Little tiny story on that. When John and I were first starting, I had a friend who he had helped coach one of my earlier companies on anxiety and depression. And he called me up and he said, "Paul," he said, "you want to climb Kilimanjaro with us?" And I said, "Well, no. I live next to Mount Olympus in Utah. I haven't even climbed that. Why would I go to Africa and climb a mountain? That doesn't sound any fun." He said, you have to give up all your Saturdays for the next 4 months and train with us. And it's going to cost 10 grand. And I said, "Well, hell no. Why do I pay 10 grand and give up my Saturdays?" He goes, "Well, let me tell you what I'm doing." He said, I've handpicked 12 of the top CEOs and entrepreneurs that I've worked with. These guys have sold their company for 200 million or 500 million. And he says, I want them to just kind of learn from each other on the mountain and connect with each other. And he starts reading through the list of the guys who are coming already. And, on it included guys like Richard Branson, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that he was trying to get, but he ended up not coming, but some of his guys did. But halfway through the list, I'm like, now when are we going again? Because I knew that spending a week wherever I was, I wouldn't care if I was climbing the mountain barefoot, to spend a week with guys like that and then I wasn't looking at it as, hey, these guys could invest in my fund, but even just the association with guys like that was totally worth it. And, I became really close friends with some key figures for when John and I were first building our business. I became good friends with them at 19,000 feet throwing up, but it was one of the keys to our early big investors and big partners was who I had met on that mountain.
Nice. We've got to talk about team building because I know this was essential for you at Bridge Capital. I know, again, essential for you when you started to do nonprofit work. And I'm sure now with the retreats that you're doing and anything else you've got your hands in. But this is a thing that a lot of entrepreneurs that I've noticed that scale to the $1 billion level have a natural knack at, or at least they've learned to do it really well. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are at the early stages, growing up to 8 figures or so, still really struggle with, because you can build a nice little business up to 7 figures where it's mainly you and a couple people nowadays. And then people don't really understand the importance of getting 8 players on the team. And I equate it to this. It's like, a Super Bowl team or a World Cup team or a World Championship team. The managers and the owners have to consistently filter through players as fast as possible to find the all-star team. But we don't think about that a lot in business because when we fire somebody or let them go, essentially we're cutting off their livelihood. And if they're a friend off top of that, because you've worked together for a certain period, it makes it even harder. So I'm curious, what makes you good at that? And what are some of the strategies you guys applied at Bridge Capital?
Well, we first of all, you hire slowly and fire quickly. Don't get too emotionally attached. Understand that disciplining people or letting them go is honoring the mission and honoring the people who are committed to making it happen. And it's honoring the guy that you have to let go. If you can do it with compassion, you don't have to do it out of anger and hatred. I use the story in my book. If you got a rat in your kitchen, you got to remove the rat. Now you have to understand he's being the best rat he knows how to be, right? You don't have to do it out of hatred, but you've got to remove him from the kitchen. He's going to get everybody sick. And so you can do so from a place that doesn't have a lot of hatred and anger and doesn't destroy, but you do have to pay attention to that. And the longer you allow somebody who's sucking the lifeblood of the company to hold on, then you're doing a disservice to everybody, including the vision. Beyond that, from the beginning, when John said, Paul, we don't have the pedigree or background to build a multi-billion-dollar company. I said, yes, but if we build it with integrity from the beginning, we build the framework from the beginning that will attract the right people, then the team will come to us. That old thing, the Field of Dreams movie, build it and they will come type thing. That's really what happened, is by putting together the right vision and the framework, the right people started getting attracted to us. We did have to filter through a lot, but in terms of actual partners, I remember that Don and I flew to Hong Kong. We wanted to meet his old boss. His name is Bob Morris. Bob was the global head of Citigroup's investment bank. We were hoping, this was back when Citi was the largest corporation on earth from a capitalization standpoint. And we were hoping that he would put $20 million investment into our fund. And I remember we flew across the ocean. We're sitting there and I have the pitch book. I have the private offering memorandum, and we push it across the desk. He literally doesn't even open it up and pushes it back across the desk. He said, I don't need to see any of that stuff. I'm thinking, crap, this is a waste of a trip to Hong Kong, right? He said, I've been watching you guys for the last 6 months. He points at me, he said, I know more about your bio than you do. I'm like, oh crap, what's on that, right? He said, I'm not interested in putting 20 million in. He said, I'd be more interested in putting 300 million in, and I want to own the GP.
Wow.
Now, Don didn't want to work for him again, and I didn't want a boss. And so we actually turned him down and negotiated over the next number of months. He ended up coming on, not as majority ownership, but as a big chunk, but not just the 300 million, but with a commitment to stay and be a full partner, 40 hours a week plus, and helping us take it to where we needed to be. Now with his credibility, we were able to walk into Morgan Stanley and have him write a $500 million check. And so this was part of the team building from the beginning. It was simply creating that vision, creating a foundation that would attract the top tier guys, and recognizing that, hey, it's okay. It's okay if this guy has so much more credibility than me. And it's okay if I give up a big chunk of equity to be able to bring somebody like that on. I joke about how, John and I in the beginning, we both had 50% of a pie that was making us a few $1 million a year. Or we could have 25% of a pie that's making 10 times that. Or we could give up some more and we could have 15% or 10% even of a pie that was making 1,000 times that. And so it ended up making it so we were all very, very, very wealthy, and gave up some equity to team members that could come in and augment where we couldn't.
So let's shift gears a little bit. We talked about business. You had built a multi-billion-dollar company with John, and you were kind of on the top of the world, at least in from business standards. Living in I believe, a 10-bathroom house with 8 bedrooms or something like this, and 7 fireplaces all by yourself.
Yeah, it was a crazy life. I had a
couple helicopters, right? Like
who needs 2 helicopters? I mean, it literally takes both hands and both legs just to fly one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an incredible lifestyle. And, I thought that it was everything that anybody could ever want in life.
Yeah.
I was having parties at my house that if a senator or a congressman didn't get invited, I would get a call from their personal assistant asking if they made me mad, right? This was the kind of caliber. We would have events where we would have NBA players and NFL players. It was a lot of ego. It was a lot of energy that wasn't in full alignment. I trying to find find fulfillment in that space. I was giving away lots of money to charity, but the truth is I was giving it away in a way that blowing up my ego even more. I wouldn't just write a quiet check to somebody. I would make sure that the only checks I was writing was at a gala where I was the high bidder on something. The whole room could see me spending 50 grand on a stupid trip somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It was all ego. And when you're in that space of not being in alignment, then it affects the important things in your life.
Yeah. And you had I believe, an acquaintance or a friend come up to you and asked you if you wanted to go undercover in South America to get some kids out of sex trafficking. And let's dive down that rabbit hole. I believe you asked yourself a question, which one of the things I was really excited about this interview is because there's a lot of similarities that came up with, I believe, your mindset and kind of my mindset. You talk about win-wins a lot, and I've always been a big fan of creating win-wins in every situation that I can. You use your intuition, which we haven't dove down to. I'm going to ask you more about that, but you're strongly connected to that. But then also it really hit me because I heard you on a podcast and you asked yourself this question: when I'm 95 years old, looking back on my life, and for some reason, I'm very curious why you said that number, that age, because I asked myself the exact same question, not when I'm 100 or not when I'm 90. I always say, and I can look at my journal right now, when I'm 95 years old, looking back on my life. And I was like, no way, it's too many similarities happening. So you had a friend that, or acquaintance come up and asked you if you wanted to go get kids out of South America that are in a sex trafficking ring.
Well, back to the doing events for people who, like bringing in investors and finding out their wins. One of the things that had been a passion for me for a long time was self-defense and gun training and things like that. I had a lot of friends that were Navy SEALs and Green Berets that I would have training events together. And I have a certain set of skills from a previous life that makes me somewhat safe in a dangerous place. And
sounds like Liam Neeson, you
there.
That's another similarity. I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu too. So
you are.
I have a certain set of skills too,
That's great. So I had invited our attorney general at the time to a lot of my events, and he loved coming and doing some of those trainings. So he knew about some of my background, and he called me up and he said, Paul, and he also was at a lot of the charity events where I had donated big money to different. I was on the Make-A-Wish board of directors. I was donating a lot of money there, anything relating to kids. And he called me up and he said, Paul, he said, I know that you're very passionate about helping kids with charity. He said, and I know you have some background that a lot of people don't know about. He said, he didn't even say that yet. He just said, I know that you want to help kids. He says, there's some operators that are in South America, in Cartagena, Colombia, that have identified 20 children. They need to rescue them, and they need to raise some money to make that happen. And I'd love to introduce you to them. I think it'd be right up your alley. I says, hey, and we were super close friends at the time. And so I said, yeah, bro, I would love to meet them. How can I help? And so we did. We helped make that happen. 2 weeks later, one of the operators called me and he said, Paul, he said, I'm in Cartagena. There's not just 20 kids here. There's more than 50. There's more than 100 children in the surrounding cities that we've identified. And I think we can rescue them all on the same day. But I need your help. And, ego me is thinking, well, as long as I get my name on a plaque somewhere, I'll give you, how much do you need, And so I asked him, how much money do you need for that? He goes, well, he said, I actually need you. He said, can you be in Colombia in 2 days? He said, wow. Shauna told me a little bit about your background. And he said, I have to have somebody who can negotiate a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction with the cartel, with the traffickers who are selling these kids. The head trafficker's got a piece of property. He wants to develop it to a brothel that he's selling these innocent young victims to wealthy Americans. Wow. And he needs a few $1 million to do it. And if you fly down then and convince him you're willing to do it, he says you can be a key part of this. So that was the 2 calls that changed my life.
Wow. And this is the question, this is the time you ask yourself this question, right?
Actually, I got a call from John.
Okay.
John Pennington. So he called me up like an hour later. He's like, Paul, I heard what you're doing. He said, John's always been the voice of logic in my life. He said, I've heard what you're doing. He said, have you thought this through? He said, you're set. You sell out today. You buy an island. Be happy the rest of your life. I said, would I really be happy if I bought an island? If I bought another helicopter? If I bought another jet? I said, would that make me happy? I said, tell me this, John. And if I was doing something else dangerous, if I was climbing Everest tomorrow, I already climbed Kili, right? If I was climbing Everest tomorrow, you and I would have the same conversation, wouldn't we? He goes, yeah, we probably would, Paul. I said, well, and when I'm 95 years old, I look back at my life and I say, I climbed this mountain. I built this multi-billion-dollar company and I helped rescue this many children. Which of them really matters?
Yeah.
Which would you be proud to tell your grandkids? He goes, oh, you're right, Paul. He says, you have the skill set. He said, if there's something about you that they could use to help rescue these kids, I'll support you. And he ended up being one of our biggest supporters.
Wow. This was coming from, because I felt this, and I know a lot of founders feel this after maybe an exit or, 10, 15, 20 years in business, they have the wealth and they no longer have a fulfillment or passion for making more money. And it's kind of like, well, maybe I should start a family. Sometimes people do that, and that fills a purpose in their lives. But can you describe the feeling, the lack of fulfillment that you were feeling regularly? Was this something in your back of your mind that was kind of haunting you? Was it in your dreams when you woke up in the morning, you're like, I don't really like this, but I'm not going to give it up? What was that like for you?
Well, it was showing up in my relationships. I had a 22-year marriage that was headed for a divorce. I was already dating a girl who was incredibly toxic, and my kids weren't talking to me. It was just this kind of, life's not worth living if I can't find some fulfillment somewhere. In fact, one of my dearest friends in the world is named Andrew McCubbins, and he was almost identical in the space of me. He was making $1 million a week in his company. He had multiple Lambos and Ferraris, and I remember he came into my office and he said, Paul, he said this was soon after I did my first mission. He said, Paul, I heard what you did. He said, I want to be a part of it. He said, what does it cost to rescue kids and whatever? And I told him. He wrote like a $50,000 check and gave it to me. And I said, he said, now I want to go on the mission. I said, you can't just buy your way on a mission. This doesn't work that way. I said, this is way too dangerous. He said, no. He said, you keep that money. He said, you tell me whatever I have to do. He said, if I have to train every day of my life for the next 10 years just to do that, he says, I need that kind of fulfillment. He said, I can see it in your eyes. And I found out that he had already done some extensive training in escape and evasion and he spoke multiple languages and he had a background similar to mine. And I told him to go train Krav Maga. I says, have you ever heard of Krav? It's Israeli Special Forces hand-to-hand combat training. And I says, you go to Joseph, and if a couple years from now, if Joseph calls and says, you're ready, I'll take you. 3 months later, Joseph called me. He says, Andy's been in every single day, 4 hours a day. He hits like a freight train. I've never seen anybody like him. And sadly, Andrew ended up doing 22 missions with me. And sadly, a 3-letter agency under a former administration decided to target anybody who was going against Epstein and some of the child trafficking work and everything else. And his business ended up being targeted. And it's guys like us put more on the line than just our life. Yeah. In fact, one of my intro videos, the Attorney General says, guys like Paul literally put everything, their reputation, their financial background. I have spent millions and tens of millions of dollars in this fight, and Andy did as well. But both of us came out on the back end so much more fulfilled in every way. He now has an incredibly healthy relationship with his wife and family where he didn't before. I'm now in an incredibly healthy marriage where we couldn't have with where we were in being so out of alignment with the important things in life.
And you ended up doing over 70 missions throughout a 10-year period, roughly?
Yeah.
Yeah. And going into some of the darkest holes of the world.
Unimaginable.
Seeing some of the nastiest things. So, of course, most people know the movie and the book Sound of Freedom. If you guys haven't watched that, go watch that. Go get the book. Absolutely incredibly powerful book. I also have to give a shout out to a very dear friend of mine, Alexandra Russell. She runs a nonprofit called Urban Light. And for the past 15 years or so, they've been helping boys. It's the only nonprofit that helps boys get out of sex trafficking in Thailand. And she runs that in the north of Thailand and has won numerous awards. And she's kind of the one that opened my door to this whole world and understanding it. And we actually got to meet some of the boys at a Christmas party party once when I was in Thailand at her headquarters, and it was incredible to see because they were just normal young boys playing video games, having fun together. But at night they would go to the bars in Thailand and sell themselves, which is sad to a lot of often, sadly, white foreigners from the U.S. or Europe coming to do that sort of thing. So a lot of people know the story of The Sound of Freedom. A lot of people know the story of the documentary where you go into Haiti with, I'm forgetting the name of the nonprofit, OAR? OUR.
Yeah. I separated from them about 6 years ago, but I did a lot of undercover work with them for about
Yes.
5 years.
Yes. And can you share one of the missions that maybe isn't so popular that we know on social media or through books or anything? One that maybe really hit home to you.
So this is the backstory to that Operation Toussaint that you were talking about in Haiti. I had done 12 undercover child rescue missions in Haiti, and I mean, Port-au-Prince, Haiti is the most dangerous place on the planet right now. And one of those missions, I was with Andrew, and we were tired of seeing trafficking coming up everywhere in the Caribbean. We wanted to chop the head off the dragon, so we were going to figure out how high that went. And this one ended up taking down 4 federal judges is how high it went. But how we got there, we were in an area of town. It was called Patientville, just outside of Port-au-Prince. Worked our way up to what I call a level 3 trafficker. This is one who physically holds the children in captivity. And it was a lady. It was a heavy-set woman who had been trafficking kids for decades. And her thugs had brought us to her. There was this red door. It was about 4.5 feet wide, about 7+ feet tall, steel door. And she sticks a key in this door, opens it. I mean, this is 2 a.m. It's an incredibly dangerous area. It was just me and Andy. And we go in and it's dimly lit, cobwebs, and then there was multiple cell doors down the left-hand side. And she sticks a key in one of these doors. And as it opens, it wasn't even a bed. It was a steel plank that was held to the wall with a chain where you could, tip it up and get it out of the way. And there was a dirty blanket, holes in it. It was on that plank where this child would sleep. And to the left was a concrete block, and there was a little girl. She had been taken from her parents at 7 years old. Her parents were killed in the earthquake. Nobody knew that she was alive, and so nobody was even looking for her. And she was sold for the unthinkable to foreigners every single day, 20+ times a day for 7 years. And that little girl, she looks up at me with this blank look in her eye, like, oh, this is every day. And I said, yeah, that's what our boss is looking for. And, we marked the area. And that little girl didn't speak for 2 weeks after we rescued her. And her very first words that she said were, I didn't think anyone would come.
Wow.
Now, what makes me so mad is that every single man who walked through that door for 7 years was there to harm her. Andy and myself, we were the first ones to walk through that door that didn't have that intention. She's now learning to dance. She's in a healthy home, back in school. Another one, just a real short one that was hugely impactful, again with Andy, it was in Dominican Republic. And there was a woman, first of all, the man who connected us, he was an escaped convict from the U.S. And he was selling kids. And then he gets us on the phone. He says, no, I have 2 special ones that I want to not just, bring to your party. He says the mother wants to sell them, like sell them for good, get rid of them. She wants $10,000 a piece. And Andy and I were there, and this trafficker turns the phone on to speaker mode and calls this mother. And she says, listen, I'm going to do this deal, selling my 2 kids, 9 and 11 years old, but I need you to make me a promise. And Andy and I are thinking, okay, maybe this mom is wanting to say, hey, make sure they're well fed and taken care of. You don't beat them, whatever. She said, I need you. She's thinking that we're taking these children to Miami to a brothel to sell them for sex for the rest of their life. She said, I need you to make me a promise. If you're ever done with them, I need you to be done with them.
Oh, wow.
She said, I never want this to come back on me.
Wow.
That mission was one of the hardest ones we ever did. The reason behind it is that felon ended up getting shot by another trafficker. There was some dirty feds that were involved, and we had to pull out before we did the full rescue mission. And because the felon was shot and I didn't have the direct contact to the mother, we weren't able to pull those kids out. And that's something that haunts, I know Andy, it haunted him for years, in knowing that these kids were in a home with a mother who literally not only wanted to sell them for money, but never wanted them to live again if we were ever done with them.
Wow. I've got so many questions. The first one that comes up is that anybody wants to know, how do you manage seeing that and still perform your duty that you're supposed to do without vomiting, without getting violence, without running away, without crying, all of those things? Like I would assume you have to separate yourself from really your own consciousness, like even your own heart, and play a role through
Yeah.
that.
Well, and this is the reason why so many veterans have PTSD that is almost incurable if they don't have the right tools to do so. And we'll talk about that later. But, we have to disconnect emotionally. I told my operators, I said, listen, it's not our job to judge. That's God's job. But if we need to arrange that meeting a little bit early with God, they're wasting my oxygen. You're raping a child. You're wasting my oxygen. We're done. We're done. And it was hard. It was hard seeing things like this child in this little cell, with no windows and just a steel bed type thing. It was hard. It was hard seeing these kids that were being sold by their mom. This felon had brought them on his motorcycle so that we could see them. And they were holding on to me and Andy because they thought that maybe even us taking them and buying them and them knowing what would happen, that it would be better than their life at home. It was heartbreaking in every way. And sadly, it actually compounded the very problem that we were trying to fix with me and Andy in our personal lives, because whatever heaviness was creating a disconnect emotionally with us, between us and our family and the important people in our life because of the wealth that we had created, there was even more that occurred when we were in the darkest places of the world and we had to just disconnect emotionally because we just wanted to kill them all. And I started looking, we were blowing through undercover operators. We had Green Berets with 300 missions in Afghanistan that already had PTSD. One mission with me, seeing a menu with children's faces and prices of things that you could pay for, it would just send them over the top. They're like, no, I'm done. I can't deal with this life. I already have PTSD. And then I got a phone call from Andy and Jimmy. Jimmy had done 13 missions. Andy had done 22. And Andy said, Paul, do you trust us? I said, yeah, I literally trust you with my life. When we're out there, I'm in charge of talking. You're in charge of making sure I don't die. They said, you need to come to this healing retreat. And my exact words were, I don't need to heal. I'm Paul Hutchinson. Everybody wants to be me, right? Like I got 2 helicopters and nice cars and all the girls I want. And it was compounding my problem. Now I had the best panty dropper story on the planet. I was rescuing kids on the weekend. It was toxic to my home life. They said, now, yeah, you do need to heal. You're on your second marriage, headed for a divorce. Your kids don't talk to you. You think that happiness is going to come from one more car, one more party, one more rescue mission, one more girl, one more whatever. He said, you're disconnected in all the wrong areas. And that experience is what completely transformed my life in every way, is that next weekend with those 2 men.
And that's where you went in and I believe you did psilocybin experience?
Yeah, they had introduced me to some doctors and some scientists who were working on the proper protocol for the use of different psychedelics when it comes to PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma, anxiety, depression, etc. And at the time I thought, wait a minute, these things are Schedule 1 drugs, or they're dangerous like cocaine. No, psilocybin's literally safer than table sugar. There's never been a case of addiction, not one ever. There's never been a case of overdose. However, now laws will change, and it's so important that responsible entrepreneurs, business leaders, and parents understand what works and what doesn't work. I am not a fan whatsoever of somebody going to a rave party and getting high with their friends on mushrooms. This is not only a bad idea, it's dangerous. And let me just take 2 minutes and explain why. Your subconscious mind literally controls 95% of our life. When most of the things that we're doing, our subconscious is just managing. And if you imagine that subconscious mind is a gold bar, and it's just, and to change things in that gold bar because it's in a hardened state, it takes 21 days of chiseling at the outside of it to try to create a new habit. When we're children, 0 to 9 or 10 years old, that gold bar is actually in liquid form. It's in your subconscious, your mind is in a state of neuroplasticity. You're very impressionable. You can learn 3 or 4 languages at the same time, but then if something happens, if your uncle abuses you, or even something simple like your dad says you look ugly and blue, whatever it is, those things can get deeply embedded in that gold bar and they run your life. You're wondering, why am I going through unhealthy relationships relationships over and over and over again? Why am I have all these anger issues? Why is anxiety continuing to pop up every time I'm in a room with people who I think are better than me or richer than me, whatever it is? All of these things, especially as entrepreneurs, they come up and we're like, wow, how do I fix the man in the mirror so I can fix my pocketbook and my future and my business? That's really what has to happen. And so what happens is the proper use of these plant medicines creates a temporary state of hyper neuroplasticity, just like when you were 10 years old, 9 years old. That subconscious, that gold bar goes back into a liquid, a flow state. Now, if you're at a rave party and you've got rap music going over here and somebody yelling at their wife over here and somebody, orgy going, whatever it is, there's that energy can get embedded and can create real long-term damage. However, if you're with a trained facilitator, you're in a proper environment with the right music and the right intention coming in, you can literally create 10 and 20 years worth of therapy in 24 to 48 hours. We've seen it over and over again with veterans. You can watch the news articles from just the signing, where they talk about how veterans who had PTSD and problems that nothing could fix 10 or 20 years worth of therapy in one single dose of iboga, 80% of them release their anxiety and depression. And in 2 doses, boom, 90+%.
Yes.
The numbers are incredible. So it's important for people to do their due diligence. Liberating Humanity has lots of information, liberatinghumanity.com, lots of information on the proper use of these. And so it changed my life. In fact, if you're okay with it, I'll tell you the story of what changed massively for me. I was there. The medicine, my first experience, was the most beautiful, horrific experience of my life. Horrific because I was shown pure empathy. Chris, the medicine showed me I could feel in every cell of my being, I could feel the pain that my children felt when I cheated on their mom. I could feel the pain. I could feel the pain of every time I was out of alignment with another human being and how they felt. I also could feel the joy of the tenants that had a beautiful place to live because of what we had created. And it bridged the separation gap and created a sense of unity between me and humanity that I had never experienced before. And in that unity, I experienced all of the pain of anybody who I was out of alignment, including the ripple effect of their actions. The guy who come to my party, slept with a cheerleader, his wife left him, and a year later, his daughter gets abused by the boyfriend of the mom, or the son gets on drugs, all because that guy was at my party. Right. And I was out of alignment. And so then the facilitator takes me, she was changing the music and stuff and helping me work through it. And then I came out, and we're not talking a little microdose. I mean, we're talking enough. It's what we call a ceremonial dose. You need a facilitator there to help you to stand up to go to the bathroom. Right. And this facilitator, she brought me out in the living room. I had some Greek god statues. I had Poseidon and I had Zeus. And then I had Atlas. I had Atlas that was holding the world on his shoulders, right? Yeah. And I told her, I said, you know why I have that? I said, I've got Zeus. It's because I'm Atlas. I'm still in my ego space, right? I got 4,000 employees, and it's hard. I'm carrying all this weight, but look how strong God made me, and I've got Zeus and Poseidon protecting Atlas there in the middle. And she laughs a little bit at my ego state that I'm still in. She said, Paul, I honor you for seeing some strengths in those statues. She said, but you know as well as I do that those were mythological gods. She said, what about your relationship with him? And she points at this statue I had up on the mantle of Christ. And in my super honest state, I said, I don't qualify for a relationship with him.
Wow.
She said, well, why not? I said, well, I don't keep all the commandments. I have parties and girls. She said, do you really think that it's true that you don't qualify for a relationship there? I said, well, maybe not. I do a lot of good work. I do a lot of charity. I try to really help people in any way I can. She said, why don't you work on that relationship for a minute? And so, I try to grab the statue. She goes, just sit on the beanbag. You can't even walk, Paul, right? So she grabs the statue and she sets it on my lap. And Chris, I spent the next 2 hours sobbing, rebuilding a relationship. And I rebuilt a relationship that could have never happened without what I call the thinning of the veil that happens happens in that neuroplasticity state, that bridging of the physical world and the spiritual world, that bridging of the energetic connection that people have with each other and with their creator. And it was so transformational.
That was a beautiful story, and it's a true come to Jesus moment that you had, Paul. I think
Exactly is what it was. Exactly.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. Real quick, time wise, are you okay if we go a little bit over just to?
Totally good.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It was a very good leeway into the third part of our podcast where we talk about your transformation. And so roughly you helped around 7,000 kids on your missions get out of sex trafficking. And I think that's an incredibly important job for individuals that can manage it to get in and actually physically bring them out. But now you're working on it a different way. And you mentioned like you wanted to take out one of the head traffickers to cut the head off the beast or the snake, so said. Mm-hmm. And now you're doing it in a different way. And I don't know if I heard you say this or I came up with this in my mind from watching your podcast and videos, that you're kind of taking the head off the snake in a different way by finding ways to heal people so they don't go down that rabbit hole. And I'm the type of, there's some people out there that are compassionate enough to want to understand why people do evil. And I've always explored that. I have a big heart for anybody that's hurt by people that are hurting others. But then I'm also very curious, like what gets a person to the point where they think it's okay to have sex with a child? They think it's okay to sell children. I know from my work that we did in Ghana that I did a project to raise money to build a home for children that were coming out of slavery in Lake Volta in Ghana. And what we were told is the vast majority of slave owners there in that region were former slaves themselves, and they just knew that they knew nothing else. They were brought up in that, and then they grew up as adults, and then they had some money, so they bought their own children as their own slaves. And we could go for hours about the psychology on why people do what they do. But your philosophy now, I believe, is that to cut the head off the beast is to heal people before they get there, so they do not make the decision to get there. Because I think you also mentioned in one of your podcasts that first it starts with a porn addiction, and then they push it a little more to younger and younger and younger, and then they push it more to down to 16, and then down to 10, and then from females to boys, and then all of a sudden they can't get, because of their brain chemistry, they can't get the stimulation anymore, but they still have sexual drive, so then they go and do it physically. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about how, because I think you said you're helping around 10,000 kids a monthly now or something like that with the programs and the work that you're doing. So tell us about that.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. I recognized over the years that hurt people hurt other people. I wish that I had a time machine. I could go back 10 years when I did the rescues and pull these kids out before they were ever hurt in the first place. But the truth is, and please, to the audience, don't get me wrong here. I am not a sympathizer in any way. I hope that you've recognized so far in this interview, I'm not a sympathizer of anybody who hurts a child. However, I recognize that the majority of the guys who were selling kids were trafficked themselves as kids, and the majority of the perpetrators had some heavy trauma that they hadn't healed from, and some addictions that the current system didn't allow them to work through the addictions, whether it was drug addictions, alcohol, pornography addictions, etc. So if we're going up the river and trying to fix the problem before it contaminates everything downstream, going up the river is saying, okay, 1 in every 5 men that you know has been abused as a child. And if they hold it inside and never talk about it, then it's going to come out in anger issues and addictions, and in some cases, physical, verbal abuse of somebody else, of a child. But it's not just people who are abused as children. It's guys like Epstein. It's guys that have reached the top of the ladder. I realized that most of the traffickers weren't categorized by earrings in their noses and tattoos on their necks. It was arrogance and greed and lust and unhealed trauma. And I had to look in the mirror myself and say, okay, Paul, you're doing a lot of good. You're helping people, but how is arrogance and greed and lust, how has it showed up in your life? And looking over the whole landscape and seeing how things like the Epstein situation is drawing in guys with big, huge egos and money, etc. And a lot of these trafficking parties that I was part of the rescue missions, it was because these guys were looking for somebody with a lot of money who had a big ego that was throwing these parties. This stuff happens all the time, all around the world. And so I had to take a few steps back and say, okay, it's not just the rich, it's not just the ones who are abused as children. children. It's all of us. All of us in some way need to heal because the ripple effect of our actions is affecting children across the board. And, guys, 98% of the men who are watching us today have seen pornography. 80% of them have seen it in the last month.
Wow.
Okay. Now, a lot of guys are like, oh, I'm not addicted though. Oh, okay. Give it up for a year and you tell me you're not addicted. Oh, well, it's not progressing. Oh, yeah. Think about where it started. Probably was a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, and then it progressed to a Victoria's Secret lingerie models, and then it progressed to booby pictures, and then it progressed to full nudes, and then it progressed to videos, and then it progressed. It is progressing, guys, because it's anything that is not divine intimacy with your spouse is something that can lead down a road. Anytime that you are objectifying another person, a woman, you're turning her into a commodity. You start going down a dark road, and this goes for the boardroom as well. The very second that you look at another human being, the janitor because he doesn't have the CEO role, the new assistant because she's got pink in her hair, whatever it is, the very second that you look at another human being and you see yourself as elevated above them or them as a pawn in any way, a means to an end for you, I promise you're playing in the same frequency energy that is driving child trafficking and all the other challenges we have in this world.
Wow.
So we all have to look in the mirror. We all have to say, what do I need to do to change the man in the mirror to make the world a better place? We do that, we save millions of children.
Yeah. Wow.
I'll tell a little 30-second story just on that. So, I love this. A man is sitting on a couch and his little boy walks in. He says, Daddy, I want to play baseball with you. And this man, he's reading a newspaper. He's like, I know I'm busy right now. Little boy comes back in a little bit later, goes, Daddy, it's a beautiful day outside. Please, can we go play baseball? And the man, he turns the page of the newspaper and he sees there's an advertisement that's got a map of the world on it. And he has this idea. He tears out this round map of the world and he tears it up a little piece of paper and he throws it on the floor. He says, son, you need to learn your geography. You go get some tape. You tape together every single piece, exactly where every single country where it needs to go, every single piece of ocean, every state. You do that. I'll go play ball with you. He goes back to reading his paper. He thinks it's going to take an hour. The little boy comes back in about 5 minutes and it's taped together perfectly. And the dad says, well, how did you do that? And the little boy says, well, there was a picture of a man on the other side. I just put the man together and the whole world came together. Think about that for a second. You just put the man together and the whole world will come together. We spend all this time trying to figure out how to fix everything outside of us.
Yeah.
The truth is, I'm the primary investor, executive producer of the movie Sound of Freedom. Hundreds of millions of children are safer now because of that film.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't worked on my stuff, if I hadn't got into alignment in a way where I could look outside of just the ego space of funding rescue missions and having it show up for my parties, etc. Yeah. It needed to come from a place of the heart and deep meditative connection of what needs to happen to really move the needle.
Oh, this is so good. This is one of those things that we could just talk for hours and hours and hours and hours. And hopefully you'll come back on the podcast and we can do a round 2 down the line to hear more, because the evolution that you had in the story that you had is just, it's beautiful, but it's healing people. It's healing so many people. And so many entrepreneurs really need to hear that, because it's so hard for us to sometimes just get out of the weeds of the business and look at the bigger picture of why we're doing it in the first place. And then how are we truly in alignment with what we're doing? Did we just start another marketing agency to start another marketing agency? And, because we don't know what else to do. And it's powerful. So powerful. I hate to say it, but it's time to ask you where everybody can find you at so we can follow along and learn more about you.
Thank you, Chris. Well, on all social media, you can just go to Liberating Humanity, and it's usually liberating.humanity. You just type in Liberating and I'll come up first on there. And or you can just go to liberatinghumanity.com and get information on how to keep your kids safe, how to identify, some potential challenges that may be happening with your child, et cetera, whatever it is. You can get some tools there. You can learn more about the retreats and the proper use of some of the different tools that can help people with anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, childhood trauma. Or if you want to go directly to the foundation to help kids, there's links on Liberating Humanity, or you can go directly to childliberation.org, and you can get very involved with the foundation. Even $20 a month makes a huge difference in what we're doing now. with the certification programs. We're still funding operations, the guys on the borders that we're helping identify kids coming across. If you want to really get involved with helping kids and fighting trafficking, Child Liberation Foundation is our foundation.
Perfect. What's next for you?
Well, interestingly, this week, I've been a facilitator for a long time, but about once every year, we as the facilitators just make sure that we're back in alignment again. And psilocybin, you can kind of, get in that state of neuroplasticity and have the facilitator kind of dig a little bit deeper. But that's the grandmother. She knocks you over the head and says, okay, here's your blind spot. So I'm personally going to be doing the experience this weekend. I've hired some other facilitators to facilitate me
First time?
No, I've done it 12 times over the last 10 years, but in the beginning I needed a lot to fix my ship. But now I'm super excited about it. I'm excited to just let go and have her show me the things that I'm not seeing right now and where I can grow to a better place. We have a brand new grandchild, just came home last week from the hospital. So it's just heaven here. And beyond that, just continuing to run retreats. We have some great ones. We bring in a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs is who we specialize with. And I love just connecting with them on that deep heart space level. So we have a few of those coming up later this year as well.
Beautiful.
And my book's coming out in a couple months. So Your Infinite Wealth, the golden age of conscious capitalism.
I love
it. And so, this is talking about a lot of the things that we went through here on the show of creating infinite wealth in a way that creates infinite wealth for humanity as well.
And we can get it on Amazon and all that. Do you have a date when it's going to be released?
It's going to the publisher in about 2 weeks. And so it'll be about another month after that. You can get Sound of Freedom on Amazon. But yeah, Your Infinite Wealth will be a little bit later this spring.
And I saw it said book 1. Are you going to do more Infinite Wealth books?
Yes. I have... Oh, you have good eyes there. Yeah, I have so much information that I originally had 27 chapters in this one, and my team says, okay, let's take it down to something under 20, so that don't overwhelm them and just give them the nuggets, and then we'll go deeper on some other things later, and it'll be beautiful.
Paul, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We'll definitely have you back on the show down the road, and thank you for your work. Thank you for the work on yourself to transform yourself. I know that's not easy. That's very hard, and all the work that you've done in child trafficking and also sharing the information about growing your company and because that's valuable information for the world too, because then they can create more Paul Hutchinsons that then can help the world even more and make movies like Sound of Freedom and do the things you do.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Listeners, we're going to wrap up there. Thank you guys for tuning in once again, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.